Okay. Well, I don't want to take up a ton of your time, but I was thinking we could get to talk. And it's nice to meet you too. Um, uh, I was wanting to just start off and kind of hear a little bit of your story and then talk a little bit about this paper. So what if you just tell? I was wondering if you would just tell us about yourself, what your name, your background, where you went to school, how long you've been at Ole Miss, and just tell us about your historical research agendas.
Okay. Yeah, well, so I'm John Gardner, and I went to Carnegie Mellon for grad school, and I was actually in the joint economics and public policy PhD program that they have, which is really cool because, they have a sort of more of the business school side of things and the policy school side of things. And so, you get exposed to a lot of different kinds of ideas. And I graduated in 2014, and that's when I started at Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
And and Ole Miss is a great place, by the way. I've got a lot of really smart and entertaining colleagues that challenge me. And most of my research is on migration. I started off doing research on the Great Migration, which is something that I got interested in graduate school. And since then, I've been continuing to do work on migration in other contexts. And a lot of the time, what I do now is I just do work with my graduate students, so they'll come to me with an idea and we'll work on papers together. And that has really been like one of the best surprises for me about being a faculty member is, sometimes I kind of run out of ideas to work on, but students never stop,
Right.
so they just have a constant flow of ideas.
Yeah.
And so, it's fun because they have good ideas, but I can kind of help them, think of ways that they can actually, bring their ideas to the data.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of that, and I've done a couple econometrics papers too, although I don't really think of myself as an econometrician. So I always get a little bit, I'm always a little bit weary of sort of wading into the deeper waters of econometrics. But that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. I grew up in Mississippi, Brookhaven, about an hour south of Jackson.
Okay.
Yeah. So my whole family, we went to Mississippi State, but then my nephews and nieces and my brother-in-law, they're Ole Miss. So we've become I mean, I love everything about Mississippi. So I love Ole Miss. Well, how did you get into these econometrics? What if you don't feel comfortable wading into the deep end? How are you doing it? What draws you?
Well, I mean, I don't know you that well, but I feel like I'm kind of like you, right? I just really like econometrics. And so I think about it all the time. And, I mean, if you're going to do applied work, you have to know econometrics well enough to at least not get yourself in trouble.
Yeah.
And so that's always what I'm trying to working towards.
Right.
But as far as the diff-in-diff stuff, I was really lucky because at Ole Miss for a little while, we had Brant Calloway as a faculty member.
Yeah.
And actually Calloway and Santana, that was his job market paper.
And
so I read that, when he was interviewing with us, and I thought it was really, really cool, but I didn't know the background literature. I hadn't read some of the other papers on like the problems with two-way fixed effects models.
Yeah.
And so honestly, just feeling a little bit like my econometrics knowledge was already getting out of date. I kind of decided to see if I could just sort of figure out what the problems were a little bit by just thinking about it on my own before looking at the literature.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about it, and then I kind of decided to check my work and read the literature.
Interesting.
And basically, from there I had kind of developed an understanding of, I felt like I developed an understanding of, these differences with heterogeneous treatment effects. Yeah. And I just kind of had this one idea, I was like, oh, here's one thing like when I looked at the literature on alternative estimators that people were proposing, I thought, well, wow, these things are all really good, but here's this one thing that I think you could do that I didn't see anybody doing. And so I thought, I mean, this is easy enough. It might be interesting to some people. Maybe I'll go ahead and do a little write-up.
Yeah.
I've been really surprised at how many people have been interested in it.
No, it's
huge shock. So
real creative. I mean, it's real creative. It's interesting. It's interesting that you didn't know you didn't know these other papers, and you just had these fresh eyes, and you saw things. Well, you definitely saw original things, I mean, in terms of, I don't see the elements of this estimator really in the other papers. I mean, you can say Callaway and Santana and Son and Abraham have a lot of like similarities, but yours is really original and fresh and very different from the others.
Well, I have to say that, there's this paper by Thackrell and Tho, where they kind of basically did exactly the same thing for an event study, and they were sort of working with the same ideas too. Okay. And I talked to them, and I think we all kind of agreed that it was kind of surprising that that people weren't using this approach as well. But I mean, I think it turns out that in a world without covariates, these things are all really the same. But I definitely want to give them credit too, because they were thinking about the same things and came to the same approach. So
right. How would you? So I've been trying to organize in my mind, how would I explain to other people who are finding the new Diff-in-diff literature a little overwhelming, because there's just so much to learn and so much diversity. Now it's kind of crowded. And I was thinking, well, I would probably, think about these weighted group time, average treatment on the treated kind of papers like Callaway and Santana and Son and Abraham. I would think about stacking, and then I would think about these imputation methods. And I see elements of your paper really in all three of them. So I was curious, how do you see the new Diff-in-diff literature? How would you describe it? Explain it to me like I'm 5. How would you sort of classify these papers, and where does yours fit into it?
That's a good question. It's kind of interesting because there's all these sort of equivalent ways of thinking about everything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I kind of go back and forth when I'm kind of thinking about things. So most recently, because I saw the new working paper by Borusiak, Jaravel, and Spies. If I'm getting the names right, I hope I am. I hadn't thought about things in terms of imputation before. I had been thinking of them more in terms of averaging out group specific average treatment effects. But if you think about it, so if you have something like Callaway and Santana or Soon and Abraham, and what their estimators basically do is estimate average treatment effects and then average those out. If you think about the imputation estimator, or which is, I guess, in some cases the same thing as the two-stage diff-in-diff thing, what that's kind of doing is estimating individual causal effects and averaging those out. So really at the same day, or at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's just, at what level are you doing the averaging? So, right. I think that's kind of good intuition, to understand the basic problem, right? Which is that these things are heterogeneous. And so if you want to have one summary measure, it's going to be some sort of average. And so, you've got to do the averaging correctly, and two-way fixed effects isn't doing that, right? Except for in like special cases. So that's not my current understanding of this, but I have to admit that it seems to, I see a new paper and then my thinking starts to evolve a little bit. And it's pretty difficult I'm sure better than anybody else that it's pretty difficult to keep up with all this literature.
That's right. It is. That what you said, that was kind of been how I was thinking too, which is, with Borusiak, Chervil and Spice, they're imputing individual level counterfactuals, which gives you lots of options for how you aggregate. But that's still, what I don't know is, can we make statements that those are consistent estimates of individual treatment effects, even if they're consistent estimates at the average? And so there's a lot of these things that I still don't really know. I'm not positive, exactly how to think about those individual level treatment effects if I'm supposed to take them literally, because if I can, it seems like your approach and their approach open up some new possibilities, by getting even more sub-aggregate treatment effects.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. I don't want to say anything inaccurate, and to be honest, I still haven't carefully worked through their paper.
Yeah.
But my understanding, I think this is probably right. I don't think that the estimates of the individual treatment effects are consistent, right? But I think that they average out to something. They show that they average out to something that's consistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like at some level, I think that's true. Like if you think about a matching estimator as being averaging out imputations, I think you have that same problem, right?
Yeah.
Where you can't estimate any of the individual causal effects, but you can estimate the averages.
Yeah.
And I have to admit that I was really impressed with the asymptotic theory that they were using in their paper. That was kind of something that to me seemed like they were like squaring a certain circle that I didn't think was possible.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, your solution is really exciting. I mean, I think one of the things that's so exciting about it is really kind of deceptively simple. It remove the fixed effects using the controls, estimate your model on the residualized outcome, correct your standard errors, still uses regression, still uses software that people feel comfortable with, extremely fast, consistent. How in the world did you come to this project? It's like I said, it's extremely fresh. The approach is very fresh. It's real original. And I was just curious about the journey that the paper took.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to understand on an intuitive level why regression wasn't working, and so my first thought was, oh, maybe regret. I think for a long time people thought, okay, this diff-in-diff regression is going to work because what are we doing? We're estimating a model with a bunch of dummy variables. Yeah. And so that's going to give us a perfect fit to the conditional expectation function. And then we can free write off of that to get under parallel trends to get the treatment effects. Yeah. And so I think the way that I was originally thinking about it is I realized that, the reason why the diff-in-diff regression approach doesn't work with multiple groups and periods is because it's not a correct specification of the conditional expectation function, right? And so then all that good stuff about regressions with dummy variables goes out the door because we're using an incorrectly specified regression function. Yeah. And so then that's what led me to this particular way of thinking about it, which was that, okay, well, if we didn't have to worry about the fixed effects, right? Because those are what's causing the problems, right? Then all the good stuff that we like and know about regression, we can still use. And so that was kind of my way of thinking about it. Yeah. Which now reading some of the other literature, I feel like is maybe a fairly simplistic way of thinking about it, but it did get me there. Yeah. So that was kind of what led me down the path of thinking about these estimators. Yeah. They're thinking about this estimator this way. And, I mean, to some extent, I was kind of thinking like, I like, I think that the other estimators that people have proposed are pretty cool. Yeah. Some of them are really cool, but I also like, for better or for worse, am one of those people that I primarily just work with regressions. So I was also kind of trying to think of a way of, how could I do this with regressions? Not too many steps.
No, I think you're the modal microeconomist, really. I think that's what's going to make the paper so intriguing is there's a fair number of very active researchers that, they're not probably wanting to invest in as much human capital in the new Diff-in-diff, and as you and I have done. They're probably wanting a consistent estimator, with correct coverage that they understand really well and can implement. And if it's regression based, it means they don't have to throw away a lot of human capital, and I feel like this is going to be a really exciting solution to a lot of people, especially people that are going into this literature for the first time. But I guess I was wondering, what do you think is the strongest argument that you would present to someone who knows several of these estimators and several of these papers, but is unsure about which one to use? What's the situation under which you would advise them to consider your two-stage Diff-in-diff?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. To my mind, the real primary advantage of the two-stage approach is really just how easy it is to implement it. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, and like, it's not a good advantage, but it is an advantage, right? And that's the same reason I think why people tend to use regressions a lot, even though we have more sophisticated estimators.
Right.
And it's kind of adaptable. So you could make different assumptions. You could use the two-stage framework to make different assumptions about how the covariates enter into things. Yeah. So that's kind of nice. But the truth is, I would say that the considerations are really the same as any treatment effect estimator, right? I mean, if you do Callaway and Santana, you get all that flexibility in terms of, you're not making functional form assumptions about how the covariates are entering into things. And so that's really useful. Plus, conditional parallel trends, right? I mean, if you're thinking really carefully about how covariates are entering, and you probably should take that into account. And I think that you can kind of fake it in the two-stage approach, but their inverse probability weighting thing, or their doubly robust thing, is going to get it just right, or at least just right up to your specification of the propensity score. Right. And so really, it's just the same thing, And I've seen somewhere where, I'm sure you've heard, some real econometricians complain about how, we have like pretty sophisticated methods and people tend to still use pretty simple methods. Yeah. And even though I like to use simple methods, I have to say that there's part of me that really agrees with what they're saying. I think it's kind of historical coincidence that we do so much with regression. So, my advice to somebody who knows all the estimators, knows all the literature, is, you do the thing that's, the most appropriate for your situation, And I think I saw your blog post where you were talking about, bringing theory into, motivating people's estimation strategies. Mm-hmm. And I think people should be doing that too. If you really think that there are time invariant covariates that conditional trends depends on, then, I think it would be a good idea to use an estimator that's going to do a good job of picking that up. Right. Right. But at the same time, I also kind of think that on a very basic level, if you just get rid of covariates on a basic level, all these estimators are pretty much the same. Right. So from that perspective, just in terms of understanding the basic idea, I think it might not matter. But when you drill down into the implementation details, I would say you got to use something that's kind of tailored for your estimate. I don't want to encourage people to use something that's like overly simplistic or not appropriate for whatever their particular empirical application is. Right. And, I also will say that it seems like a lot of this literature on Diff-in-diff is just coming from people paying really close attention to details that we've kind of waved our hands over in the past. Mm-hmm. And and it's showing that those things can kind of matter,
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, you definitely see that with like Santana and Zhao and this time varying covariates, who
exactly, yeah.
who
I
in
mean,
their
that's
right mind would have thought that would be a problem.
exactly, yeah. I mean, and when I never thought of that, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And I do think about econometrics sometimes. And so that's
yeah,
kind of
right.
like a revelation to me. And the two-way fixed effects thing to begin with, I mean, people were just doing this
Yeah,
and kind of not thinking carefully about it. And
yeah,
then, a bunch of really smart people pointed out that there are problems with this in some
yeah,
situations. And
yeah,
so, you
yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's right. I mean, I guess like that is, people always make this joke about it's the fact that we can type in reg in stata that creates a lot of challenges, which is, well, I can put covariates in. I mean, I can literally put them in. Whether I should or shouldn't, or whether what it'll do is a different thing. Which data generating processes will it not perform as well for? But putting it in is trivial. And I guess like that's the strength of the two-stage diff and diff too, is it's so flexible. You could go back to triple diffs again. I mean, doing triple diffs with Callaway and Santana, I don't know how to do that. Doesn't seem like it fits that very well. But yours, it's like we're just being gifted two-way fixed effects again. Is that I mean, we're being gifted regression back to us with just a little bit of some fixes.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely lets you kind of get back to using regressions. I mean, in some circumstance, like I should also just make a point that I didn't do a very good job of talking about in the paper, which is that the sort of asymptotic theory that I developed it assumes that you've either got individual level data and things are varying at a group level, or you've got some group level averages.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, though, I think that the version of the asymptotic theory that Barusiak, Jaravel, and Spice did kind of works regardless of that problem. So
Yeah.
they
Okay.
take that to a different, that their estimator would allow you to work with regressions even in those circumstances.
What would be a situation where yours isn't appropriate? Because individual level data and sample averages seem pretty. What are you thinking? Like totals, group level total, or
Yeah,
state
yeah,
level
yeah,
total?
yeah. Like if you had a count or something
Yeah.
like that, then if unless you believed that parallel trends held exactly when you had the true count,
Yeah.
then there would be some extra estimation error
Oh,
lying
yeah,
around.
yeah, yeah. You've got all these means. I
Yeah.
noticed that. I was trying to understand why everything was being expressed as means. I didn't know if that was just notational style, but you're saying that actually, not working with averages changes things a little. Working with total crime at the state level.
Yeah, yeah. It would be and actually the notational thing was just a style, and I kind of hadn't thought really paid enough attention to that case.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you were gonna do like just a standard error correction and just do the
Yeah.
regressions, then you would want to look at like crime per capita or something like that. Like,
Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure. You would probably. So you're saying, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So converting things, getting closer to these averages, actually, that's pretty common anyway. But now it's like, your estimator is like, we're kind of requiring that the reader or the user know that this estimator really is about these means, these conditional expectations, and so units of observation need to either be individual level data or some measure of a mean,
exactly.
as
Yeah.
opposed to like but that's not too restrictive, right? That's probably, I'm trying to think of papers. I mean, it's very common to denominate by population or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. But you also
Oh,
see,
but yeah, like
yeah,
exports. You could have some sort of, trade model or something that's like exports, or there could be something that where maybe that doesn't quite fit.
yeah, that's right. And that's
Okay.
and actually, like the whole thing is still unbiased in that case. It's just that the sort of GMM based asymptotic theory wouldn't be valid.
I see.
And I mean, and this is a reason why you would want to use a different estimator, right? If you wanted to look at a state level count, then there's a lot of alternatives that you could do. But it is true that is not a case that I was really thinking about when I was kind of developing the theory.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do a very good job of sort of prefacing the stuff I wrote about inference in my paper. So
right.
To work on.
Right. Well, no, that's really helpful. That's great. I mean, guidelines like the subtlety of all these estimators, it's all, I get the sense that the devil is really in the details now. Which parallel trends assumption exactly are people referencing? Issues regarding the bootstrap versus these, other kind of analytical solutions. There's these things that, I usually don't have to sort through at a deep level and figure out what exactly is this one doing or requiring that this one is not, because that's just a fairly sizable amount of study that I don't always push myself towards. But that's great. Well, one of the things that I didn't notice, and I think it would be good for listeners and readers, is, you don't mention the reversible treatment or the irreversible treatment assumption that you see in like Callaway and Santana and others. But you could easily do it. Obviously, I could imagine it's going to be, in that first stage. I was wondering, if you were to approach it as reversible treatment, does things break down? And is there anything that we need to know?
Yeah, I have thought about that a little bit, but I haven't thought about it very carefully. I mean, I think that, if parallel trends held and you had a part of the data where nobody was treated, then the first stage would still be good.
Right.
But my intuition is that then you'd have good estimates of your group and your period effects.
Yeah.
And then once you put those in, if you did the second stage, you would just be averaging, I believe, over all of the periods where people were treated.
Yeah.
I guess that would be like a weird, I think that would be valid. When in Diff-in-diff or like in event study settings, I always think about things as being sort of like, there's an effect of the treatment, but it varies in one period. But then in your second period of treatment, it's changing. And when things are reversible, it just gets more complicated. But I think that would still identify for you the average over all the periods where everybody in your population was treated. But don't quote me on that, because I'm not entirely sure.
Well, maybe that's something that it's good to bring up. And, this is something that, it very well might be valid. That's the thing, is you've made this invention and discovery that, you're probably people are going to be reflecting on for a while to see if it can be extended to those cases. And maybe it can. I think that's something that people should be thinking about, is that, that part is still something to be worked out maybe, but so that's really great. Well, John, I'm just so impressed with the paper. I would feel so, I like you, I'm not an econometrician. I'm a lover of econometrics. And so since you put yourself out there and actually, did the hard work and made something really original and creative, it's really cool. It's really cool because it really adds something, I think, to the body of scholarship that is already so high quality. This is going to be a paper that people are going to be reading and using, and it's really cool. You should be proud of it.
Well, thanks, Scott. No, I really appreciate that. Like I said, I love econometrics, and it is, I have to say, really cool anytime I can contribute a little bit to it, because, we spend so much time thinking about these things.
Yeah.
And, we invest a pretty good chunk of our lives studying. So
right. Well, it's great. It's great. Well, thank you for meeting with me, and thanks for allowing me to pick your brain about the paper and just learn a little bit more about your thinking about it. I hope that if I get anything wrong tomorrow, I'm going to post my Substack with this interview. I hope that you can read it and sort of tell me where to correct it, and I'll sort of do some edits.
Yeah. I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I'll take a look at it when I get a chance. I don't know. I'm a little shy about reading stuff about my own work, so
I totally understand.
I'll force myself to do it.
I'll totally understand. Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm going to turn off the recording now, but it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. Thanks for interviewing me, Ed. It's very pleasant.